I redid all that.
Yes, he was very.
It wasn't me.
But I'm just kind of curious. Is that really all?
Did your puppy okay with everything? You trying to socialize them?
Yeah, you missed. Mike,
I took her home with my person.
you missed last night. They brought their new puppy to the party. They brought their new puppy to the party.
Oh, yeah,
You would have had them all.
Oh, she's beautiful, yeah. She's pretty.
I bet he has a picture of him.
I guarantee
You
I did.
suppose
Actually, I have one with.
one picture.
Well, I have one where Danielle was holding it.
Oh my God.
Let me pass those out.
Oh, no,
Unless
take
you want
care.
all of them to look at yourself.
Oh my God.
Well, I don't know. Is it like that document the one guy brought in?
The what?
Oh, it could be.
Okay.
And I mean, it used to be. Well, this is.
Well, I'm feeling lonely up here.
Thank you.
You were interested in other church besides here, right?
Bellevue?
And these guys.
Yes, I am.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'll put a couple here in case you guys.
They're not, colleagues.
Oh,
Then I got another area just. And I.
I would get the cheap stuff.
Looks like mom. The little one is.
Because all the fibers.
Well, it's just
Only a big boy.
2 or 3 logged up.
Yeah, well, it happens at least every other Sunday. We're getting old and it'll have like inside because.
are you all the rest of
Just we get used to it, and then we have to figure out what we're doing next.
Well, he catches me by surprise. He's supposed to be gone last week.
Oh.
And then they got weathered out, so they're gone this week.
my dog, granddaughter.
Did you guys have any problems down there last week?
Where?
At your house?
With the weather.
Mom's okay?
Yeah, she's all right. Can't remember.
Oh, that'll be nice.
Hey, the house is clean. I went over to visit.
I'll come in this week.
And I didn't have allergy attacks, so I did find something, though, you gotta figure, nobody would know this, Mary sat down on the couch, and she's been sitting on that couch eating, and there's so many crumbs under the cushion, so once you throw them aside, and throw your vacuum.
Yep. Just got her day. No big
I don't
deal.
think she can see it anymore when she makes messes like that.
Well, not a lot of people open
Our
that
kids
up.
couldn't either.
Sorry.
Our kids don't either.
Well, good morning.
Good morning.
Paul's here so we can start. Since we're starting within 4 minutes of being on time, which is amazing.
New year.
Yeah, I'm gonna take advantage of the full amount of time that I have.
Give extra paper.
If you have announcements, please see Ben so that he can make them one good time up front in the morning.
What's that?
Rather
If you
than
have
make
announcements.
announcements twice. If you
Like I
have
said-
announcements, see Ben.
Yeah.
And get them to him because he does a good job of getting through everything. And otherwise, we're doing it twice and sometimes I miss the details of that. That way, if I hear it from him, I know it's gospel right there.
I don't know about that.
But we do want to remember that Mary Ann and her loss of family. And we want to remember Brooke had a seizure yesterday and fell and hurt herself, but she's here.
Yeah.
So got her Starbucks cup with her, so we know she's feeling better. And then she's been to me, she's never been to Starbucks. And I said, well, which is it? You got Starbucks cup, so happy or happy? Did you guys get paper?
Yeah.
You got paper, all right. Strangely, Ben, you must have planted a seed in my head because you told us last week it's the week of prayer.
Mhm.
I went straight home, and I don't know why, I didn't pick this because of what you said, but I picked Hannah in the power of prayer. So it's appropriate fit, and it looks like your first prayer tomorrow night is actually similar to what her prayer was.
Okay,
So that will be today's topic and prepare you apparently for tomorrow.
wonderful.
Let's start and read 1 Samuel, first chapter. Clear through 2:11. So start and read a portion. Actually, I'm gonna start at the back with Cody because I always start up here. Cody, you wanna read?
Yeah.
You know, if you can, and probably Paul, if you guys can split that into about a third each. And read from Samuel 1 through the whole chapter to 2:11 to get the gist of what we're going at here.
Now there was a certain man of Ramathaim, Lothium of the mountains of Ephraim, and his name was Elkanah, the son of Aram, the son of Elud, the son of Zahu, the son of Zapha and Ephraimite, and he had two wives. The name of one was Hannah, and the name of the other was Phinehara.
Close enough.
Phinehara had children, but Hannah had no children. This man went up from his city yearly to worship and sacrifice to the Lord of hosts in Shiloh. Also the two sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, the priests of the Lord, were there. Whenever the time came for Elkanah to make an offering, he would give portions to Phinehara, his wife, and to all her sons and daughters. But to Hannah he would give a double portion, for he loved Hannah. Although the Lord had closed her womb, and her rival also provoked her severely, to make her miserable, because the Lord had closed her womb. So it was year by year, when she went up to the house of the Lord, that she provoked her. Therefore she wept and did not eat. Then Elkanah, her husband, said to her, Hannah, why do you weep? Why do you not eat? And why is your heart grieved? Am I not better to you than 10 sons? So Hannah arose after they had finished eating and drinking in Shiloh. Now Eli the priest was sitting on the seat by the doorpost of the tabernacle of the Lord, and she was in bitterness of soul, and prayed to the Lord and wept in anguish. Then she made a vow and said, O Lord of hosts, if you will indeed look on the affliction of your maidservant, and remember me, and not forget your maidservant, but will give your maidservant a male child, then I will give him to the Lord all the days of his life, and no razor shall come upon his head. And it happened, as she continued praying before the Lord, that Eli washed her mouth. Now Hannah spoke in her heart, only her lips moved, but her voice was not heard. Therefore Eli thought she was drunk. So Eli said to her, How long will you be drunk? Put your wine away from you. But Hannah answered and said, No, my Lord, I am a woman of sorrowful spirit. I have drunk neither wine nor intoxicating drink, but have poured out my soul before the Lord. Do not consider your maidservant a wicked woman, for out of the abundance of my complaint and grief I have spoken until now. Then Eli answered and said, Go in peace, and the God of Israel grant you petition which you have asked of him. And she said, Let your maidservant find favor in your sight. So the woman went her way and ate, and her face was no longer sad.
Early the next morning, they arose and worshipped before the Lord, and then went back to their home at Ramah. What's her name? Elkanah lay with Hannah his wife, and the Lord remembered her. So in the course of time, Hannah conceived and gave birth to a son. She named him Samuel, saying, Because I asked the Lord for him. When the man of Elkanah, went up with his family to offer the annual sacrifice to the Lord and to fulfill his vow, Hannah did not go. She said to her husband, After the boy is weaned, I will take him and present him before the Lord, and he will live there always.
Elkanah, her husband, said to her, "Do what seems best to you. Wait until you have weaned him. Only may the Lord establish his word." So the woman remained and nursed her son until she weaned him. And when she had weaned him, she took him up with her, along with a 3-year-old bull, an ephah of flour, and a skin of wine, and she brought him to the house of the Lord at Shiloh. And the child was young. Then they slaughtered the bull, and they brought the child to Eli. And she said, "O my Lord, as you live, my Lord, I am the woman who was standing here in your presence, praying to the Lord. For this child I prayed, and the Lord has granted me my petition that I made to him. Therefore I have lent him to the Lord. As long as he lives, he is lent to the Lord." And he worshiped the Lord there.
All right. So, got the gist of this. We've got a religious man. We did get to the end of that, didn't we?
Yes.
Chapter 1.
Oh, then,
And Hannah prayed and said, "My heart exalts the Lord. My horn is exalted in the Lord. My mouth derides my enemies, because I rejoice in your salvation. There is none holy like the Lord, for there is none beside you. There is no rock like our God. Talk no more so very proudly. Let not arrogance come from your mouth. For the Lord is a God of knowledge, and by him actions are weighed. The bows of the mighty are broken, but the feeble bind on strength. Those who were full have hired themselves out for bread, but those who are hungry have ceased to hunger. The barren has borne 7, but she who has many children is forlorn. The Lord kills and brings to life. He brings down to Sheol and raises up. The Lord makes poor and makes rich. He brings low and he exalts. He raises up the poor from the dust. He lifts the needy from the ash heap, to make them sit with princes and inherit a seat of honor. For the pillars of the earth are the Lord's, and on them he has set the world. He will guard the feet of his faithful ones, but the wicked shall be cut off in darkness. For not by might shall a man prevail. The adversaries of the Lord shall be broken to pieces. Against them he will thunder in heaven. The Lord will judge the ends of the earth. He will give strength to his king and exalt the horn of his anointed. Then Elkanah went home to Ramah, and the boy was ministering to the Lord in the presence of Eli the priest.
okay. So we have a time frame here in the Old Testament that is from the time that Israel moved into their promised land and they had judges. This is near the end of the judges, time of the judges, but the beginning of the time of what did Israel ask for? The kings. And this literally is the transition leading from judges to kings. Samuel is that transition. And when I say that, which 2 kings did he deal with primarily? You remember your Bible story?
Saul and David.
Saul and David. That's right. So we're looking at about 12 centuries before Christ, this time frame. It's amazing to me how well people wrote at the time, because, archaeologists would tell us that writing and all that, the printed language is relatively new, but yet we have evidence that those people, if not were better writers than we are today and more clear on their meaning, and more, I don't want to say flowery, but there's a lot in their language, the way they used it. So we
It's
have
almost
an
like-
example. Go ahead.
I was going to say, it's almost like God spoke through them.
It is as if God spoke through them. Good one. What we see here is a religious man, but I have a question sometimes on him being a religious man. Why do I say that?
And 2 wives? I thought.
Yeah, 2 wives. That's exactly it. He doesn't have 2 wives,
But back then, that's a custom.
right. It was a custom. There's evidence here that 2 wives can be a problem. What is that?
There's bickering. Jealousy.
It's worse than bickering. Yeah, bickering. It's all.
I mean, how many times in the Bible do we see 2 wives being
At odds with each other, yeah.
Same with Abraham.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then one bullies the other. We see that because she was persistent. We see that is the beginning of trouble in paradise. He thinks he's a happy man, but he's got 2 bickering wives. I guarantee you, he's not a happy man. But he is a religious man. He follows through on the religious ceremony and where he needs to be and doing his time of devotion, prayer, faith. This is a good example to other people that there are 2 types of prayers in life. She gives 2 prayers here. We concentrate on one, but there's 2, and it's very important. What's the first one? What kind of prayer is it?
Heartfelt.
Heartfelt, definitely that. What else?
She's asking.
She's asking, if not pleading. She's desperate. We don't know how old or young she is, whether she's very young and she's a little premature on worrying about this, or whether this has been a long time and it's not likely she's going to have children, but it's not looking good, because this is the reason for the other wife making fun of and grinding it in that, well, I've got the kids that, for our master or our husband, and you don't. What's the second prayer then? If the first one is pleading, what's the second prayer that was read in chapter 2, 1 through 11? Sabrina.
Of joy that she did have the child.
Okay, and what else?
Praise.
Praise to who?
And thanks.
To God. What else?
Thanks.
Thanks. Yes, exactly. So, starting in 1 through 7, this is where we see the trouble. If you look at the husband's name, well, I want to tell you, that town, it's difficult to pronounce. I think one of your versions said Ramatham or something like that. Yeah, and there's actually, I had it written down here. It's Ramathea is a little more modern pronunciation of it, and probably in the New Testament that's Arimathea, and we see some similarities in time. And that is on the west bank of Palestine. So if you look at Palestine over on the Mediterranean Sea, and you've got the mountains going up away from the flats on the ocean, that's the west bank facing down before you crest over and head back down toward Galilee and Jordan River and the Dead Sea, Dead Sea and Jerusalem. So west bank, kind of facing the Mediterranean, but this is where all this is occurring. Today we look at that as a place of trouble. Back then, it looked like it was a place of religious people that were dedicated to their religious beliefs. They went and did the things that they were supposed to do. They gave to the priests. Anything else you see in there? All right, then in 8 through 11, and did you see Elkanah? His name is God has obtained. So he has obtained a servant and a what is Samuel? When it's all said and done, what does Samuel become?
Prophet.
Both, priest and prophet. Okay, so this is where God has obtained through this man and his wife. And Hannah is the favored one of God because he's chosen to deliver somebody very important to our future and very important to Israel's future. The same thing happened to a woman later, almost identically in the New Testament. Who was that?
Mary.
Kind of. There was one more.
Elizabeth.
Closer.
Yeah.
Because what did Elizabeth produce?
John Baptist.
And what was he?
A prophet.
And a priest. I mean, he really was, because he preached
Yeah.
the truth to the people, and he profited about who? Now we'll go back to the other one you said.
Jesus.
Mary. Yes. The Messiah, yes. So that there's the parallels here, and there are parallels in their prayers. So it's very interesting when people say that the Bible doesn't link together. It links together so closely, we miss the links until we've studied and studied and studied. But the link is, here's the shining example prior to Christ of coming Christ. Because the kings Samuel leads to the kings, John leads to what?
The king.
True king.
The King of Kings. Yes. All right. So I just wanted to get your mindset going that way.
Hey, Mike, I was just thinking, with Hannah's name being favored,
Yes.
yeah, we see that eventually, but how much of her life did she feel like, oh, I'm not favored by God? You know, maybe I'm not living up to this name because God has not allowed me to bear children.
So we need patience.
Yeah.
Because all good things come to those who pray to God. They just, there's an answer in there every prayer. It may not be our answer, but there's an answer there every time. Good one. That's good. Eli, the priest, his name means lofty, which when you get to that position, that's where you're at. It seems like back then, names often coincided with what you were going to become, you had done. I don't know how they managed to pick these kind of names, but they did. So her first prayer was silent. How does that affect the priest?
You think she's strong?
Yeah. So if you're at that scene and she's down on her knees up there praying by herself, and he's up here kind of observing, and he says, that woman's not saying anything, but I see her lips moving. Now, what
She
would
was
you
weeping.
think?
She was weeping
And she was-
bitterly,
Yeah,
so she was probably wet.
yeah. And so what would you think in that situation?
Well, today we would think she was praying, but back then he probably thought she was drunk or something was wrong.
Right. There's one thing in verse 8 that bothers me about Elkanah. He's a little bit vain. He's a little bit self-absorbed. What's he say?
Aren't I better than 10 sons?
I'm good enough for you.
And husbands can be guilty of that. I'm more valuable than what you're wishing for. Look, we shake the head for this.
Are you saying this isn't true?
I'm saying
It's okay.
So I just found it was interesting that they, even in this great story, managed to fit that verse in. That Elkanah said, aren't I more valuable than the son you're wishing for? If you're wishing for 10 of them. I wonder what her answer was.
Well, she was deeply distressed, so.
Women don't give up that easy. Yeah.
She's keeping her emotions under check.
Yes. Yeah. So she has good intentions. Eli misinterprets. Eli will come out the clear winner at the end of this. In 17 to 20, why is her countenance raised?
Told her to go in peace for one thing. So that would have gave her a frame of mind that someone has listened to her, not like the husband, as you just said. Oh, why I'm here, why would you need a child? Where this guy has literally listened to her, which to her probably meant a lot.
Well, I think it does, and that's a good point you bring. I think today we don't take people at their word. Eli took Hannah at her word and raised her countenance by agreeing, well, that's a good thing. Keep wishing and praying for what you're wishing for. Good things will come. And Samuel is, if you look at his name, heard of God. So she's going to get something great in her life as a result of her prayer. Eli hears her problems, agrees it's a problem, agrees if you continue, you get a resolve. He doesn't say what the result will be yet, but he has come around to that, is no longer accusing her of being a drunk, but instead, well, you have a valid point when you're praying for it. I hope it works out.
Well, then she's already dedicating, before she even receives the child, she already dedicated that child would be raised by God. I mean, nothing else would interfere with that, so.
How many people would follow through with that?
Yeah.
Even today. Is it likely you're going to give up your firstborn, Paul? Well, I better not say that. I don't know how he behaves. But I mean, really, are you going to? It's not likely, is it?
How many people make promises to God when they're in dire straits?
And there is a lesson in that.
Keep them.
Yeah. And I think a lot of times they don't keep the promise. They're on their knees when times are tough. They pray, they promise, and then they get better, and they move on. That's a great point. And go back to the same pit they were in before. Yeah. Anybody else on that? All right, so in 21:28, she weaned Samuel, Any of you ever look back to see about what time frame that would be back then?
I think typically it was longer than today, but I don't know exactly.
Anybody know or remember from previous lessons? Well, the standard for the area would have been 18 months to 7 years. The standard at this time frame was probably 5 to 7 years. Now, I'm thinking that kid was hanging on quite a lot. That would be odd today. But
Was weaning as in what we're bringing up as weaning, or weaning to where
Like,
they can be left?
two things. Weaning where they're starting to learn,
Yeah.
and weaning where they're weaned off of mom. And they clung on quite a while back then, because if you think about it, food sources were different, availability to family was different. You could create all these good things for that child, through the suckling process because of your immune systems and all that. That just happened to be how it was then. And as Paul says, there's twofold. He's not ready to learn until he's ready to learn. And at that point, probably between 5 and 7 years, and think about, when do we send our kids to first grade?
Fine.
Yeah. 5 or 6,
Younger.
yeah. 5 or 6,
For
yeah.
late bloomers,
Yeah.
like myself. So, yeah, so I think all that goes, and Paul's 100% correct, there's two reasons going on here. So he's ready, and the other thing is, if you were the priest Eli, would you want an 18-month-old or a 2-year-old showing up?
No.
Number one, you can't take care of him, so you gotta pass him off on to somebody else. At 5 to 7, he can be your little understudy. They're walking, talking, following you around.
Usually
learning
wanting
right
to
there.
please whoever.
You're learning, yep.
You've got something you need for mom and dad. But he's not even 5 to 7 yet.
No, but he is weaned.
Thank you for that information. So, all right. So she follows through on her promise, and as Brad points out, we are a little weak on doing that. She brought along some things with her. And what are the things, and what are they for?
Bull,
Yeah.
Yeah, she brings a sacrifice.
Yeah.
wine.
Mhm.
Really, I think those are all probably sacrifices. The bull, the flour, and the wine.
All right. And you can see a semblance to Christ here in that bowl is sacrifice. Wheat represents unleavened bread. Wine represents the blood of Christ. And here is another example. We are leading, 1,200 years before Christ gets here. So again, the story of the Bible is one story. It really isn't a whole bunch of stories put together randomly, as the world would have you to believe. It all begins at the beginning and ends at the end, and it's one story. Comments?
I think it's interesting in verse 28. She says, "Therefore I have lent him to the Lord. As long as he lives, he is lent to the Lord." And this idea that she's saying, well, it's my child, but I'm, giving him to the Lord, almost as if the Lord's borrowing him, really is probably more accurate to say the opposite. God, gives us various blessings, but they're really from God, and the child was from God in the first place. The child always belonged to God in some sense, as God is the child's creator.
Okay. Anybody else? I was also surprised. I'm always surprised by the husband here, how easily he gives in to Hannah. Well, if you want to give your child away, okay. I found that he agrees with her assessment to fulfill her promise. Now, I know he's a religious man. It just seems to me it would be so hard to give up your firstborn
Well,
son.
he thought he was enough, remember?
Yeah, because
He says, "Hey, you still got me."
yeah, how you going to concentrate on me if you got 2 or 3 kids to take care of? Yeah, there could be that side of it too, but yet he does agree, and we know he's a religious man because he makes trips to do his duty. Then we move in to the prayer, and this is the more famous prayer that is repeated historically in our Bibles. And in 2:10, this is where we talk about Christ as King of Kings. And the second prayer is, like you said, it's not in quiet with her lips moving only now. It is open and public. And why would that be? The difference between the two, if you're doing prayer silently to God and doing a prayer open to God, what's the purpose of that? If you're doing it silently, what's your purpose?
You don't really want anyone else to hear.
Yeah, and it's about me.
Yeah.
And if
private.
you do it openly, then what's generally your purpose?
To show others God's glory.
Glorification, yes. And both are done here. This is the one that's important that the nation hears. This is the one that was importantly documented. And it leads up to a future Messiah. When we talk about heart and mouth, if somebody, Doug, you're probably there, Romans 10:10.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For with the heart one believes unto righteousness, and with the mouth confession is made unto salvation.
All right, fits this situation exactly. She prayed from the heart in thanks to God in glorification of his greatness. And that moves up from the heart to the mouth, and it's an open prayer for all to see and hear. Amazing how all this stuff lines up again. So she rejoices in salvation. I think she rejoices in the salvation from her enemies, which sounds like her fellow wife was in her own version an enemy. She acknowledges there's how many gods? And yet they were in a land that were many, right, when they moved in, and they didn't eliminate all those people like they should have. So some of that has crept in, but yet she is a one God person. She says God is what? What? A rock. Which in that case means knowledge. He knows everything. It's strength. He is as solid as anything that we can encounter. What does he do in people's lives?
Weighs their actions.
Yes. Yeah. And he does what else?
Strengthens them.
Yeah, he rights the wrongs, right? So he makes things that are wrong in our life right. We just have to be patient. What's he do to your adversaries?
Breaks them to pieces.
Yes. And then what?
Judgment.
Yeah. And there's an exaltation here at the end. What's that exaltation point to?
Jesus.
Exactly. Yeah. It's amazing how you can fit everything in one. I mean, we can take a lesson from her. We often say, take a lesson from the Lord's Prayer, and we should, because the highlight of topic is there. It's just an outline. But in her outline for us, it's got everything. God is solid. There's only one of him. He writes the things that are bad in our life. He's the salvation from our enemies. And who prayed about salvation of enemies in book after book after book? Just
David.
Did you say David?
I did say David.
It is David. Yeah, in his Psalms. And he, time after time, oh, thank you for delivering me. These people hated me. They wanted to cannibalize me. They wanted to kill me. They wanted to burn me, at the stake. And here I am, and I'm in a cave, but I'm alive, and all because of you, Lord. David learned from this woman, and obviously from her child, Samuel, who was kind of the people. What was Samuel's purpose in King Saul and King David? Remember from your Bible stories? What was Samuel's purpose?
To try to guide them in the Lord.
Yeah, it's like he kept track of everything that happened in their lives and kind of righted the ship. Hey, don't do that.
Yeah.
This is wrong. Did he try to warn Saul that he had problems?
Yeah.
Did Saul listen? Even David at times did not listen, but David in the end did listen to this. So this, again, because of Hannah, through Samuel, the two primary kings, the two first kings of the Israel nation, the ship is righted. David echoes a prayer here. Doug Smith. It's a short, if you can read 2 Samuel 22. If you don't want to read it all, pass half of it on.
The second Samuel 22.
Yeah.
I'm getting there.
Okay,
Chapter 22.
that's it.
Your definition of short is different from most people's.
Well, then don't read it all. That's a little bit on the. I'll read the 31 maybe. And David spoke to the Lord the words of this song on the day when the Lord delivered him from the hands of all his enemies and from the hands of Saul. He said, "The Lord is my rock and my fortress and my deliverer. My God, my rock, in whom I take refuge, my shield and the horn of my salvation, my stronghold and my refuge, my Savior. You save me from violence. I call upon the Lord who is worthy to be praised. I am saved from my enemies. From the waves of death encompass, for the waves of death encompass me. The torrents of destruction assail me. The cords of Shiloh entangle me. The snares of death confront me. In my distress I called upon the Lord. To my God I called. In the temple he heard my voice, and my cry came to his ears. Then the earth reeled and rocked. The foundations of the heavens trembled and quaked because he was angry. Smoke went up from his nostrils, and devouring fire from his mouth. Glowing coals flamed forth from him. He bowed the heavens, and he came down, thick darkness under his feet. He rode on a cherub and flew. He was seen on the wings of the wind. He made darkness around him. His canopy, thick clouds gathering of water. Out of the brightness before him, coals of fire flamed forth. The Lord thundered from heaven, and the Most High uttered his voice. And he sent out arrows and scattered them, lightning and routed them. Then the channels of the sea were seen, the foundations of the world were laid bare. At the rebuke of the Lord, at the blast of his breath of his nostrils. He sent from on high, he took me, he drew me out of many waters, he rescued me from my strong enemy, from those who hated me, for they too were mighty for me. They confronted me in the day of my calamity, but the Lord was my support. He brought me out into a broad place. He rescued me because he delighted in me. The Lord dealt with me according to my righteousness, according to the cleanness of my hands. He rewarded me. For I have kept the ways of the Lord and have not wickedly departed from my God. For all his rules were before me, and from his statutes I did not turn aside. I was blameless before him, and I kept myself from guilt. And the Lord has rewarded me according to my righteousness, according to my cleanliness in his sight. With the merciful you show yourself merciful. With the blameless man you show yourself blameless. With the purified you deal purely. With the crooked you make yourself self-seeking tortures. You save the humble people, but your eyes are on the haughty to bring them down. For you are my lamp, O Lord, and my God lightens my way. For by you I can run against the truth. And by my God I can leap over a wall. This God, his way is perfect. The word of the Lord proves true. He is a shield for all those who take refuge in him.
Let's stop there. That's actually where I want to be, in refuge in him. Then we're not going to read it, but in Luke 1:46-45 is the thankfulness of Mary. In Luke 1:67-70 is the thankfulness of Zechariah. These are the exact parallels, but what I wanted to do is tie them together more importantly than reading them because of the repeating. So if you would read, instead of reading the rest of Samuel 22, jump to Psalm 113. That ties all three sections together.
Chapter 1.
Not you, God.
Yeah,
Yeah, 113, if you read that. I mean, some people don't want to read, so we can always.
So that's okay.
Okay.
The whole song?
Yeah.
All 9 verses.
No.
It's 9.
Yeah, all night, it's all night. I knew one of them was short. I had the wrong note here, but he got to where I wanted. Yes, all 9
Praise
verses.
the Lord. Praise the Lord. Praise those servants of the Lord. Praise the name of the Lord. Blessed be the name of the Lord from this time forth and forevermore. From the rising of the sun to its setting, the name of the Lord is to be praised. The Lord is high above all nations, and his glory above the heavens. Who is like the Lord our God, who is seated on high, who looks far down on the heavens and the earth? He raises the poor from the dust and lifts the needy from the ash heap, to make them sit with the princes of his people. He gives a barren woman a home, making her the joyous mother of children. Praise the Lord.
Okay, here's Hannah, exactly. He makes the barren women. He talks about when in her first prayer, she was the poor, the needy, the people who not only sat in the filth, but then end up setting with royalty, which she did because she sat with Eli and with God because of Samuel. And then his greatness, he made the barren. So the tie-in is Mary's overjoyous for what?
For her child, Jesus.
Especially for the child, yeah, the child Jesus. And Zechariah was muted for 9 to 10 months. Once the first thing come out of his mouth when he was no longer muted,
He praises God
what for?
for the child. Yeah. John the Baptist, yeah.
Because they were all ancient and they couldn't really have any kids anymore, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it was another miracle.
Yes.
Yeah. So God's map, again, tying the whole thing together, is Adam's there and he's a type of Jesus and he falls. David's there and he's a type of Jesus and he falls. Jesus is there and he is Jesus. He is our Messiah and he is perfect and leads us, to eternity. So again, the timeline on God's Bible is from beginning to end is one and the same. We usher in the one that will usher in the kings. I think it was very telling that the last words of the book of Ruth, which is right before Samuel, is it ends with David, which prepares us in Samuel for the coming of David, which prepares us for the time of kings, and the ultimate ending king, again, is Christ. And I know I repeat myself on this, but it's just a timeline we have to think of every time you turn in your Bible and think, that's not a disjointed book. This is all tied together. It's just one timeline. And nobody could be that perfect. In today's world, you couldn't write a set of books the size of our Bible and be right from beginning to end and be able to time together perfectly. You just couldn't do it. It shows divine nature there. It shows divine intervention. Yeah, go ahead.
They got somebody wrote a song out of that chapter there.
Yeah.
It says, I will call upon the Lord.
Oh, we have sang that.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
That's one you like, man. I know you've let it cook a couple
Yeah.
times.
Yes, I do like that one.
In fact, your kids like it. I've heard them very loudly.
Yeah.
Yes.
At least one of them. You
At
put
least
loudly, yeah.
Yeah. Anybody else? Go ahead.
I like that song too.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people do. It's but
I mean, who wouldn't?
That's true.
I mean, if
And
there's
it's-
a lot of people that don't, then there's something wrong.
I hate that song.
So we're at the end of this. It's going to be time to quit here in a second. Any other things or stories that you've learned from this that you can bring forward? Is our prayers effective?
Yes.
And is there an example for us in these prayers?
Yeah.
Every prayer, right? Every prayer can be modeled after these prayers because it's a different need, but it still can be modeled here. And when you get something you ask for, as Brad says, let's give thanks. Let's follow through on our end of it.
Mhm.
Lord, I'll follow you if you can just help my family do this, And Lord, I'll get better. I'll try to strive to be better. Instead, we don't go backward, or we shouldn't go backward where we were. We should go forward because we've been blessed. So, any other comments on this? Sorry I had you read so much, but the only way to get this message out, so. No, we're in there on time.